We're going to go ahead and get started. And I know that you saw the write up about it. I said that, well, you can hire individual coaches, you can change the policy, you can restructure, you can host retreats, but nothing is going to happen unless and until the executives get aligned. And I've been working quite a bit here lately with executive alignment. So this is my topic today. And what I'm going to do in this session, I'm going to reveal the executive mindsets and behaviors that undermine culture and what to do if you recognize any of these signs. So here's kind of how this is going to play out. I'm going to give you the 5 behaviors and the mindsets that go with the behaviors and then why it happens. Following that, I'm going to give you some questions to ask and then what I say, the truth that will set you free. With that, my intention here, and make this very clear, is not to pick on executives. My intention is to shine a light on what might be the root cause of some of the cultural problems. So if you happen to be in a senior position, feel free to direct message me after this office hours. We can set up a time to talk if that's appropriate. Now, if you're not a senior leader, my hope is that you will use this information to help your executives rather than using it as a way to undermine them because they already have tough jobs. So you can use this knowledge also to prepare yourself for elevating. So I'm going to share the top 5 behaviors. I'm going to list them one by one. And if you stay to the end, I'll give you the entire list by order and you can take a snapshot of it. Better yet, there's always a place to go get the learning guide. This is going to be available for a very short time. So go get the learning guide at marlenechisholm.com/office hours. You can go to my website and you'll be able to find that. You can get the PDF download with the things that I've talked about today. Okay, so we're going to get started. Okay, so the behaviors and mindsets that I'm going to discuss today in order is the first one is delegating cultural healing. Delegating cultural healing either to HR or OD. Number 2 is executive infighting. Number 3 is perpetual reorganizing. Number 4 is defensiveness. And number 5 is lack of curiosity. Okay, so I am getting ready to share the very first one, which is delegating cultural healing. I know you've probably never heard that term before, but for right now, that's what I'm calling it because I experience this a lot. And recently, I overheard a senior leader say, basically, human resources is responsible for the culture. So that was the mindset. Human resources is responsible for the culture. Well, this statement really highlights the lack of understanding of how culture is created, shaped, and reinforced. And there's nothing that HR or any one person can do to shape culture if the top leaders don't align their behaviors with the mission, vision, and values of the organization. So I'm going to give you some examples of delegating cultural healing. So the behavior that I see a lot is assigning the head of organizational development, the head of HR, or even an assistant or a secretary to start out when there's a perceived problem, to start out by getting pricing for workshops. So what this tells me is that there's a idea that we figured out the problem and we've also figured out the solution, and there's been no strategy, there's been no examination of why things are what they are. So the mindset is seen as a quick fix. That's the hope. So they find someone that's authored a book, they find a consultant, they get a generic workshop, even doing programs on LinkedIn Learning, hoping that that's going to fix a deeply rooted cultural problem. Now, here's why that happens. It feels good to do something. So we get into this checklist mentality that helps us to avoid responsibility for the real work required to fix the system. So I'm going to give you the question to ask. The question that really gives you insight is, what happens after the retreat or the workshop? Because usually we're in a fantasy about that. What happens after the retreat or the workshop? If you can't answer that, it means you have an assumption that there's a quick fix. And so here's the truth. Workshops and facilitated retreats are part of the process, but they're not a quick fix. Your changes really won't be that sustainable without strategy, coaching, and accountability. And here's something to remember too. It's really a practice once you get your systems in place. Nothing is sustainable. Like you don't read a book one time and get all the answers to every question. So when we expect sustainability from a very short-term fix, that's just kind of shows some wrong thinking. Okay, so we've now talked about delegating the cultural healing, thinking that you can go get someone like when someone calls me and the first thing they ask is, I'm supposed to get prices for your workshops. Oh, I just take a deep breath. There's a process, and I need to talk to decision makers to see what the problems are, why they think those are the problems, and so on. So the second behavior and mindset is what I see a lot. It's what I'm working with a lot right now, and it's probably the most um, common problem that I'm seeing right now is executive infighting. There's a myth out there that it's only the people at the front lines that are having drama and problems and conflict. It just gets more subtle and more complex and more political the higher you go. If executives fight with each other, even in subtle ways, here's the deal: the employees know it and it leaks out. It really leaks out as innuendos, gossip, side glances, getting social proof. And it happens all the time. And it's an indicator that we're avoiding conversations with someone who has a different style, different idea. And this infighting contributes to bad decision making. For example, an executive had a toxic employee that she needed to terminate, but she wouldn't do it because she had the fear that her decision would be used against her by her CEO. So, what this means is that because she's afraid to seek support, she made the assumption about how her boss would react, and she didn't want the conflict. She didn't want to do the heavy lifting and have the conflict capacity to explore other ways of thinking about the problem. So she allowed the toxicity to continue. And everyone knew it, but no one knew what to do. So I want to give you some examples of executive infighting. And I've seen this talking about other executives with team members at different levels and getting social proof. There's also a mindset of I'll let them know that I'm not the bad guy because it feels good when people agree with us. So sometimes the temptation, if you're close to your team members that you're leading, it's really comfortable sometimes to discuss with them and get that nod of approval, but it really undermines the culture. Here's why we do it. It feels good to get social proof. It can feel like you're building a relationship with your subordinates or colleagues, but it's an inappropriate relationship because your alignment has to be first to the organization and then the executive team in order to row in the same direction. So here's the questions that you want to ask. The first one is, do we have the courage and conflict capacity to disagree on the executive team? Like, what happens? What are the patterns? So, can we disagree, or is it just like it's not worth it and we don't have the capacity? And the second one is, does keeping secrets from my boss align with our stated values? And usually it does not. And would my boss or colleagues be blindsided to know how I really felt? So, those are the indicators that you're avoiding a conversation with your boss. Here's the truth that's going to set you free. When executives are not on the same page, it's like parents fighting and blaming the kids for the behavioral problems. So many times it's rooted in something more than just what's showing up and what you're witnessing. So try to look at where you're avoiding conversations with your executive team and why. What has been the pattern? Okay, so now we've covered two. We've covered delegating, cultural healing, and executive infighting. I'm going to check in to see if there's any comments. Again, I want to mention that you can go and get a PDF of this that's going to be available for a short time. You can go to marlenechisholm.com/office hours, and that's going to have you to sign up, and it'll get delivered to you as a PDF. So now I'm going to go to number three. Number three is perpetual reorganizing. That's what I'm calling this one. So, perpetual reorganization is a sign of avoidance at every layer in the organization. For example, you see this, you know that you have, and please post in the comments if you've seen this or if you've been a part of this. There's a difficult person in a department. No one has the courage to give an appropriate evaluation or coaching. So, what they do is a reorganization. We're going to reorganize. And what that means is we're going to put these two troublemakers in a basement office. They're away from everybody else. That's going to solve our problem. Or we're going to reorganize. We're changing the titles and we're going to move this person over under this person's direction, this new supervisor. We're going to put them with them and let's see if we can start fresh. But I say it's kind of like clipping a dandelion in a field full of dandelions. You think you've nipped it in the bud, but the next year the root system has gotten bigger and you've got a field full of dandelions. So moving people around and reorganizing under the guise of we really need to reorganize when the truth is you really just need to have a conversation. I see that quite a bit. And so there's reasons to reorganize, and then there's excuses of why we're reorganizing. So here is some examples. Here's the behavior. A top executive has a senior level person under his charge, but he doesn't get along or like the person. So instead of having a conversation about the work product, instead of just talking about the reality, he reorganizes and gives this person to his senior vice president, and then later gives direction that this person needs to go. I've seen this kind of undermining, and I think it's really out of integrity. So you have to be careful as a consultant with what you're seeing and really ask those hard questions sometimes. So the behavior is constantly hiring consultants to offer 360s when a high level person is struggling, instead of holding a conversation when the problem first appears. So sometimes my suggestion, rather than me working with someone doing a 360, me fixing them, they're a better person now. Let's talk with the person who's their boss. Why have they not been able to make any headway? So here's the mindset that I see a lot. I think it's very damaging in an organization. The mindset is they were hired to do a certain job and they should know these things. I shouldn't have to babysit. They are supposed to make my life easy. And while there's some truth in that, it's really about the ability to have conversations and coach someone that's a level below you, or even a colleague if necessary. Why this happens? It's really just easier. It's the path of least resistance to move someone than to face the discomfort of a real conversation. They may still need to move. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. They really may still need to move, but at least it will be based on mutual agreement and integrity versus wink, wink. We need to reorganize. I'm going to give this person my bad problem. So here's the questions to ask. Does my subordinate know how dissatisfied I am with their work? And I know you think, oh, I've told them 1,000 times. But if you really look at it, you've only thought it 1,000 times. You've hinted, you've complained to your peers, but you've really never sat down to have a real honest conversation. And I would assume that's because you either don't like the feeling of it, or you don't want to get a bad reputation, or you don't have the skills to know how to guide that kind of conversation. And that is a really big part of the work I do. I have programs on LinkedIn learning, but I do this in the corporate world as well, where I'm teaching these skills and the framework. And it is, if you haven't got my book, it is in my book, From Conflict to Courage, How to Stop Avoiding and Start Leading. So does my subordinate know how dissatisfied I am with their work? And number two, who is the one that's uncomfortable? Is it them or is it me? Because if it's you, that's an opportunity for growth. We always think, well, I don't want them to cry. I don't want to hurt their feelings. But the real truth is, I don't like how I feel when I cry. I don't like how I feel when their feelings are hurt. So if we can learn to be uncomfortable, we can do just almost anything. So here's the truth. The organization could probably save a lot of money if there was a process to have difficult conversations about behavior and performance. If you're constantly having to do 360s when someone messes up, and I believe in those, but it should be part of the process that you have every year. But if you're constantly throwing those out when someone messes up, it probably means it's gone on too long, and you're using a consultant to say what could easily be said if you have the coaching tools. And the truth is, many leaders are just uncomfortable with conflict and they don't have the skills to have the conversation. So instead, they resort to the path of least resistance. So the fourth one, and this applies to everybody, not just executives, and so we can all do some self-examination here. The fourth one is defensiveness. Aggression and bouts of unmanaged anger builds barriers instead of bridges. No one wants to work for a boss that lacks self-control or emotional or has emotional immaturity. So if you or your leaders have a habit of blowing up, there's an addiction to releasing pent-up energy. If you only lose your temper on occasion, it's a sign that you're letting things build up or that maybe you've hit your capacity. So right here, instead of an example on some person, I just have like sort of a bullet list, examples of defensive type of behaviors. A habit of blowing off steam. Even if you're not accusing someone else, that energy makes a lot of people really nervous unless there's a lot of trust built and unless that's just the culture. raising your voice, calling others out at a meeting and embarrassing people versus just a quick, calm, let's all get recentered and maybe a conversation afterwards, like really calling someone out. In our interpersonal relationships, eye rolling, interrupting, the need to prove a point and have the last word. If everything is a struggle to talk with you, and we already know that you're going to have the last word, you're going to say, that's not true, give me the facts. It's just difficult. So the next one that I'm going to give you is going to give the solution to how to manage that. But that need to prove a point, I've had that one before, I'll be honest, especially if you are a person that journals and documents, like it's really easy to just get in the way of yourself by needing to prove the point versus being curious about why they see it like they do. And then, like, once we start to hurt each other's feelings, there's all this grudge holding, and that's where that gossip and happens that we talked about earlier. And then the lack of patience for another point of view. So here's the mindset. There's just not enough time and no one else has my sense of urgency. That's the mindset. Why it happens is that blowing off steam feels really good initially, but it creates these neural connections for the purpose of venting. And the outcome is strained relationships. People will not speak up if they fear your behavior. This behavior can be such a blind spot because you know yourself, you know your way of being, you know that you're just spouting off, you know that you just had a bad day. But it's really about self management. And so self management has to come before conflict resolution. You cannot resolve a conflict if you're not managed. And so at the top of the chart, you have to learn how to self manage, even if that means taking a break, if that means calling your coach or your therapist. You have to learn how to manage disappointment, manage anger, and not fly off the handle and make irrational decisions just because it feels good in the moment. So here's the questions to ask. How can I increase my self awareness? What can I do to increase my own self awareness? Because if you're blowing up and you're telling someone off or you're shooting off a harsh email, chances are you're not bodily aware. You're not aware of when things are building up. You're not aware that you haven't had your sleep, that you're hungry, that a deal fell through and now it's been 3 strikes and you're out. Start to become aware of the patterns and of how your body feels, because you can actually say, right now is not a good time. I'm feeling really drained. I'm feeling triggered. Just learning to do that will change your relationships, especially having the authority and power at the top. Another question is, how can I self regulate by meeting my own needs first? And one way we can be disciplined is just to make sure we get our sleep, we get our rest time, we get our needs met, and we check in with ourselves. How am I feeling? Am I in the mood for this? What's my intention for this meeting? The third one is, do my behaviors align with the values that I say I have? And do they align with the values that we've got posted all over the website and on the posters in the building? Are my behaviors aligning with that? Because that's an example of integrity. And would coaching help me to elevate my game? Sometimes just a witness that's on your side, that doesn't judge, that's helped other people, can just give you those little tweaks or those tools that can just really elevate you to the next level. So here's the truth. You have to set the example of leadership, and that probably means you have work to do on yourself. And you probably need a coach that's not afraid of your anger or afraid of telling you the truth. So here's what we've talked about so far: the behaviors and mindsets, delegating cultural healing to someone else and not being engaged in it as an executive and not strategically thinking about it. Number 2, executive infighting, the one I see the most. Number 3, getting someone else to do the dirty work. So you reorganize, you just shove someone off to another department because you don't get along with them. Defensiveness, that was the last one. So again, if you want the PDF, go to marlenechisholm.com/office hours. And if you're a senior leader and you want to explore working together, you can direct message me here on LinkedIn. And so feel free to direct message me whether you're a senior leader or not. Love to get the examples. Sometimes I do talk to frontline and middle managers, and they give me great examples. And then I have more to look for because they are living in that world. So I'm going to go into the home stretch here. Number 5 is lack of curiosity. Sometimes top leaders feel a lot of burden to have all the answers, so they fail to share their burden, and then they come off as a know-it-all. This is just a blind spot. It's just the burden of top-level leadership. So some examples of know-it-all behaviors is making decisions without getting other perspectives. As a side note, I've seen the opposite where everybody's trying to sing kumbaya and you're asking 6 or 7 people to agree. Sometimes you've got to make that distinction of when is this a top leadership decision and when do I need other perspectives? And ultimately, when you're the top decision maker, you make the decision even though not everybody agrees. So that's sort of the distinction there. Not listening to the emotional component in a conversation. You're not hearing when someone's not happy. You're just listening for words only, and you're not in tune or in touch with your own emotions. So it's really difficult to see when there's disagreement and to pull that out of the conversation. I also see for very bright, this happens sort of in the C suite at the CFO type level, someone that's very linear, very left brain, very numbers oriented, the spreadsheets and all that. Sometimes they kind of miss the reading the room. So they over rely on facts and statistics. They've got that part of the brain really developed, but they're not reading the room. They don't get that what works on a spreadsheet doesn't always work in reality. So it's balancing those perspectives. But here's the mindset of whenever there's this lack of curiosity, when there's a know-it-all kind of way of being perceived, the mindset is that there's only one right answer. There's no other perspectives. And if you don't get it, you don't get it. There's a mindset that since the idea works on the spreadsheet, it's going to work in reality. And that's not always true because people are emotional, they're not robots. And then there's the mindset that since the buck stops here, I'm the only one that matters, so I have to make the decision. And the decision is not going to be a good one if you don't at least consider and hear other perspectives. Doesn't mean you don't make the final decision, but the curiosity and then being able to reason why you made the decision you made is what's going to make people think that you're more open. Here's why we do it. Everyone wants certainty, and it's difficult to admit that we'll never know the choice we didn't explore. Everybody wants certainty, and our world is becoming more uncertain. And even with AI and all the frenzy that's going on with that, we still have to be critical thinkers. We still have to check the facts. We still have to guide the prompts. So there's always going to be the need to be human in this robotic world we're living in. So I'm not all worried about it. I think we'll all catch on and it'll be what it is. But it's like we want this certainty and we're trying to create it sometimes through this technical opportunities. But we as leaders can create more clarity. We'll never have certainty, but we can create clarity. So here's the questions to ask. When should I seek other opinions? Is this something I need other opinions and points of view on? And number two, how could this decision affect retention, customer experience, patient safety, et cetera, et cetera? Make a grid and weigh out your decision against how it affects other stakeholders, other operations, other departments, and the world at large. Like do some critical thinking and don't be so short-sighted. What other approaches might have equal value? That's another question. And what do I need to do to notice the emotion in the room? And one thing you can do is start to ask questions. How does that land with you? I thought that you disagreed. I looked at you and it looked like you rolled your eyes. Do you disagree? When you start bringing those elephants into the room and checking the temperature, you start to get better at noticing your own emotion and that of others. So here's the truth. Good leaders practice curiosity even when they about how they're perceived by others. So how do others see me? Am I lining up with the way that I want to be seen? Because that's what integrity is when others see me the way I want to be seen. And be willing to self-regulate to hear what you don't expect to hear. You can always circle back later. So that is pretty much the scope of today's program. I'm going to give you um, the different ones. That little picture is over number 3, but this is the 5 that I talked about today. Here we are. And so I invite you to go get the PDF download at marlenechisholm.com/office hours. If you got value today, and especially because I messed up on the time and we had well over 200, about 240 people signed up, if you would just share this on your own timeline, invite other people to watch, go get the learning guide, and feel free to message me about any insights or any problems that you're having. And I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.